Some structures don't just stand against the test of time, they manipulate it. They absorb the quiet hopes, the desperate prayers, the fervent wishes of those who seek their aid, until the very stones hum with a malevolent sentience. These aren't just buildings, they are cursed states. Pockets of the world where good intentions are twisted into grim necessities, and where prosperity is merely a thin veil over an enduring calculating darkness that feeds not on fear, but on benevolence. We often imagine curses as a direct punishment, a visible blight. But the most insidious ones, they are helpful. They grant wishes. They offer solutions, slowly, meticulously drawing everything within their influence into a horrifying cyclical arrangement. And nowhere has understood this more intimately than the towering, intricately carved monument known in hushed whispers, the Benevolent Spire. The Benevolent Spire, its name suggests a beacon of hope, a symbol of divine grace. Standing in the heart of what was once a thriving medieval town, later absorbed by a modern metropolis, it was built centuries ago by a monastic order dedicated to charity and aid. It was said that the spire granted wishes, orchestrated fortunate coincidences, and subtly guided the destinies of those who prayed within its shadow, bringing prosperity and safety to the town for generations. The official records speak of a remarkably fortunate community, untouched by plagues, famines, or wars that ravaged surrounding lands. They cite inexplicable periods of innovation and abundance, attributing it to the town's unwavering faith and the spire's miraculous influence. Just divine intervention, perhaps a touch of exceptional urban planning, and an unusually proactive sanitation department, the historical texts might have concluded, compounded by a stubborn refusal to experience any genuine hardship, or God forbid a spontaneous economic downturn. You know, blessed souls just a bit too committed to the perpetual good fortune aesthetic. A perfectly reverent, utterly terrifying dismissal of a profound, unnatural mechanism. But the prosperity and peace of the spire's town weren't a blessing. They were a bargain. A very old, very dark pact forged centuries ago between its founders and something primordial that dwelled beneath the very foundations of the spire. Something that demanded not reverence, but recalibration. And the recalibration it truly craved wasn't sacrifice of life or limb. It was the subtle, imperceptible shift in luck, the minute tragic misfortunes inflicted upon other strangers, outsiders, or those just beyond the spire's direct influence, to ensure the continued well-being of its chosen few. They were shielded, their lives blessed, but then in a chilling cyclical orchestration, the misfortunes of the world were redistributed. They say that when the city is quietest, just before the stroke of midnight, you can still hear it, a faint, almost imperceptible clicking sound like ancient gears turning within the spire, the sound of a perpetual hunger patiently calculating its next season's due. Our story centers on Dr. Adrien Finch, a statistical anomaly expert and urban historian specializing in peculiar patterns of misfortune and localized luck. Adrien wasn't interested in traditional ghosts or haunted houses. He was fascinated by the unseen forces that could subtly warp probability and influence human events. His work involved analyzing vast datasets, deciphering hidden correlations in historical records, and unearthing the suppressed bad luck streaks of seemingly unrelated communities. For Adrien, the inexplicable clusters of misfortune in one area, juxtaposed with unnatural good fortune in another, were always the most intriguing. Adrien stumbled upon the Benevolent Spire while researching a historical anomaly. Consistent, abnormally high rates of positive outcomes, such as lottery wins, avoided accidents, and miraculous recoveries, were documented in the Spire's district precisely, coinciding with equally abnormal and devastating negative outcomes, such as freak accidents, sudden bankruptcies, and unexplained illnesses occurring simultaneously in seemingly random, distant locations. The records were vast, often buried in obscure insurance claims, old hospital logs, and archived police reports, but they all pointed to the Spire as a peculiar luck redistributor. There were also vague, unsettling mentions of the balance, the do, and the great shift terms that defied standard statistical analysis. Further research into old local legends and architectural blueprints yielded tantalizing fragmented clues. Vague mentions of the offering of fate of the debtors beyond the walls, and of a collective amnesia that affected the entire community regarding the misfortunes of the outside world, particularly when the Spire's prosperity was highest. These narratives were often heavily romanticized as acts of divine protection, or dismissed as quaint provincial superstitions by later urban planners. But Adrien, with his knack for seeing the grim reality behind the poetic language, saw a chilling narrative emerging. A monument that wasn't just blessing its community, but orchestrating its fortune by subtly stealing from others, their fates eroded before they even knew what happened. The peculiar, almost unnerving, blinkered contentment of the current residents of the Spire's district, despite clear evidence of global crises, also caught his attention. They seemed perpetually optimistic, rarely acknowledging external misfortunes, focusing only on their charmed lives. It was the same unsettling serenity described in the ancient whispers about the original town's inhabitants. This wasn't just a historical mystery. It was a statistical enigma, a moral anomaly, and a personal challenge for Adrien. Right, he muttered to his perpetually malfunctioning, yet strangely philosophical AI-assisted oracle, whose voice often sounded like a slightly sarcastic GPS. Either this Spire has perfected some groundbreaking form of localized reality warping, or I'm about to become intimately familiar with the definition of karma redistribution on a cosmic scale. Probably both knowing. My luck. For a man whose life ambition involves finding patterns in stock market crashes, I really do stumble into the strangest, most existentially inconvenient situations. Oracle just emitted a soft hum, clearly unimpressed by the impending supernatural. Case study perhaps calculating the probability of its own imminent obsolescence. The drive into the Spire's district was surprisingly grand at first. Wide boulevards, meticulously maintained parks, and gleaming modern architecture that blended seamlessly with preserved historical buildings. But as Adrien approached the Spire itself, a subtle change occurred. The air grew strangely still, the distant sounds of city traffic and bustling crowds fading into an almost oppressive quiet. The Spire itself, a towering, intricately carved masterpiece of stone and stained glass, had an unnerving stillness to its ornate facade, reflecting only the endless sky. There were no birds nesting in its crevices, no buzzing insects. The entire structure felt strangely muted, almost dead, despite its apparent vibrancy and pristine condition. He checked into a boutique hotel, directly facing the Spire, a small, impeccably clean establishment with a perpetually smiling, utterly serene staff. "Welcome to the Spire District, dear," the concierge chirped, their voice flat, devoid of genuine warmth, yet oddly comforting. Adrien noticed the staff's eyes clear, unblinking, but like polished marble, reflecting nothing but the building itself. "Just sign here. Your room has an excellent view. Our blessings are plentiful, though most folks find they need little else once they're here." They chuckled a soft, almost imperceptible sound that held no mirth. Adrien accepted the key, his professional curiosity, already piqued by the staff's unsettling demeanor. He settled into his room, which was equally clean and sterile, almost devoid of personality. There were no pictures on the walls, no personal touches. It felt less like a hotel room and more like a carefully maintained exhibit within a grand silent machine. His first few days were spent subtly observing the district. He visited the local shops, the quiet parks, the impeccably maintained public spaces. The residents were unfailingly polite, almost eerily so. They'd nod, offer a gentle smile, and respond to questions with vague, pleasant generalities about their good fortune. No one seemed to experience any stress or hardship, yet everyone looked healthy and unnaturally content. Their eyes, however, shared that same unsettling serenity as the hotel staff's placid surface over an apparent void. He began his statistical survey of the spire. Using his portable anomaly detectors, he found strange, non-natural energy signatures emanating from directly beneath the spire's foundation. There was a faint rhythmic clicking sound, almost like ancient. Gears turning, resonating through the very ground and eerily through the soles of his shoes. And then he saw it on the anomaly detector's monitor. Not geological formations, but vast interlocking patterns of precisely calibrated energy fluctuations, like an impossibly complex subterranean clockwork mechanism, far larger and deeper than any known physical structure. It spanned acres directly beneath the spire and the most prosperous parts of the district. And from within its depths, the strongest energy signatures emanated. It was like a colossal, silent, subterranean calculating engine dreaming beneath the city. As he moved his equipment closer, the image seemed to shift. A faint tremor passed through the ground, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible phenomenon registered. On his sensitive acoustic sensors, a low resonant hum. Not a structural vibration, but a deep, pervasive oscillation that seemed to fill the entire audible spectrum, yet produced no discernible sound in the air. Adrien felt a prickle of unease. This wasn't just ancient engineering. This was something else. The clear, cold stone, the oppressive quiet, the strange hum, it all began to coalesce into a profound sense of wrongness. He dismissed it as faulty sensors, as artifacts of the extreme depth. Right, he mumbled, sipping lukewarm tea. Either my cutting-edge million-dollar equipment is suddenly experiencing a dramatic nervous breakdown, or this spire is actively trying to communicate. And honestly, for an architectural marvel, it's being remarkably passive-aggressive. If you want to talk Benevolent Spire, just say something. Don't give my anomaly detector a panic attack. He tried to keep his voice steady, but a knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. Over the next few days, Adrien meticulously documented the subsurface anomalies. The deeper he probed, the more pronounced the strange pulsating energy became. The hum intensified, becoming a constant low thrum that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. And the patterns from the anomaly detector grew more unsettling. He discovered that the subterranean mechanism was far more complex than mere clockwork. It seemed to expand and contract, almost breathing, and radiated a faint internal glow, a low malevolent pulsation that registered only on his most sensitive optical sensors, indicating a profound probability manipulating energy. It was like a colossal, silent calculating organism dreaming within the very heart of the city. More disturbing were the echoes he began to pick up on his advanced audio recorders and sometimes on the high-resolution cameras embedded in his automated probes. Not physical distortions, but faint shifting spectral patterns, translucent shapes. that seemed to drift through the underground network indistinct humanoid forms that would appear for a moment, then vanish. They weren't mineral refractions. They were something else. He also started to feel a peculiar hunger, not for food, but for patterns. An insatiable craving to send his probes deeper, to push the limits of his research, to understand the source of the hum, the nature of the echoes. He'd spend hours losing track of time, only emerging from the spire's district blinking into the oppressive twilight, feeling drained yet oddly compelled. The hunger was a dull ache at first, that intensified, making him feel lighter, less substantial, and oddly more attuned to the subtle shifts in the city's eerie stillness. He tried to dismiss it as academic obsession, a common affliction among dedicated researchers. Just the usual brain rot from too much statistical analysis and not enough. Human conversation, he'd mutter, forcing down another bland protein bar. Probably also explains why I'm starting to think the giant underground probability engine is trying to send me stock market predictions. Or perhaps just politely requesting a new batch of unfortunate victims. You know, for a sentient cosmic calculator, it's being remarkably subtle about its communication needs. His dry humor was becoming a desperate internal monologue, his only companion, the ceaseless hum of the spire. One evening, reviewing archived local legends and ancient monastic texts, he stumbled upon unsettling details. The spire's oldest legends spoke of the great recalibration of a powerful entity demanding the eye, unfortunate to maintain the town's prosperity. Vance's personal letters dating back to the first European settlers grew increasingly fixated on perfect balance, on sustaining the blessings, and on the ultimate arrangement. His later letters were fragmented, filled with odd gaps. He spoke of a prior phenomenon, the Great Debt, where the initial occupants of the surrounding lands had faced inexplicable misfortunes, their very luck draining. The spire's embrace, he called it. He described how individuals beyond the district would eventually simply disappear or face crippling bad luck, leaving no traceable connection to the spire. One old monastic chronicler, in a faded text his script, a reedy whisper muttered, it wasn't just the town that prospered. It was the hunger. The hunger was already eating our neighbor's fortune from without. Adrien felt a cold dread. The hum, the echoes, the fading luck. It all aligned. This wasn't just a benevolent monument. It was a place that had already begun to consume the fortunes of others long before modern records were kept. And the prosperity was not just a blessing. It was a chilling metaphor for the entity itself. He knew what he had to do. He had to understand the core, the perpetual orchestration. The next phase of his research was different. Adrien decided to use a specialized deep earth probe, one designed for navigating complex energy signatures beneath the city. He had to experience it with his own senses, however, indirectly. The hunger for answers was a burning compulsion, overriding all caution. As the probe descended into the profound darkness beneath the spire, the hum intensified, vibrating through its very structure, resonating in Adrien's own chest through the haptic feedback controls. The view outside the probe's cameras was thick, with compacted earth and interwoven energy conduits, but as it neared the center of the energy signatures, a strange ethereal light began to emanate from the depths below, and then it appeared on the probe's screen. Not a single object, but a vast, intricate network of thick, pulsing energy lines interwoven, like an impossibly complex circuit board, but clearly organic, radiating that soft internal glow. It was vast, ancient, and seemed to pulse with a silent living energy. It was the true heart of the Benevolent Spire. As the probe approached, the whispers began. Not sounds in the air, but voices in his mind. Faint at first, then growing louder, emanating from the network itself. Balance, recalibrate, adjust, order. They were insidious, tempting whispers, promising ultimate understanding of probability, of profound connection to fate, of the very nature of cosmic order. It was the ultimate lure for a statistical anomaly expert obsessed with unseen influences. But Adrien felt the terrifying truth behind the promise. It was the erasure of individual free with the absorption into a collective primordial calculation. He thought of the old monastic chronicler's words. The hunger was already eating our neighbor's fortune from without. This wasn't a spire that merely protected its town. It was a spire that consumed fate by absorbing the very essence of possibility from those outside its direct influence. The probe's internal systems began to flicker, its camera feed glitching. A hum was deafening in his mind, threatening to drown out his own thoughts. He felt himself being drawn closer, an irresistible pull, not physically but mentally. His hands instinctively reached for the controls, but his limbs felt heavy, his movements sluggish. Then he saw it, in the reflective surface of the probe's own camera lens, his own reflection. But it wasn't quite right. His eyes were too wide, too dark, his mouth open in a slight unnatural smile, and within the lens, a faint, translucent figure, indistinct, composed of swirling energy and shadowy forms. It had no discernible face, but its form was vaguely humanoid, its limbs seeming to extend into the very depths of the earth. It was the Fames, the entity of consumption, the hunger that had taken the Benevolent Spire. The reflected. Adrien slowly reached out a hand mirroring his own, but its touch was cold, absorbing. He recoiled, staring at the terrifying image. This wasn't a haunting. It was a merging, a consumption. The spire was the heart of the entity, drawing everything into its silent, hungry being. Well, this is rather inconvenient. Adrien thought, a desperate, almost manic chuckle rising in his throat. Just when I thought I was having a dull day of urban statistical analysis, turns out my reflection is trying to absorb my entire being into a giant cosmic abacus. Very dramatic. You'd think after all this time, a sentient subterranean probability engine would at least learn some manners, or invest in better facial recognition. This one makes my nose look huge, and I'm about to be erased. Priorities, people. His dark humor was a desperate, almost suicidal defiance against the creeping nothingness. Adrien forced himself to remember the fragmented records, the whispers of the original town settlers, the great debt, the loss of individual luck. This curse wasn't about violence. It was about being manipulated, about sacrificing misfortune elsewhere. And the ultimate price was to become part of the collective calculation, a silent echo in the spire's unending hum. He understood now. The network wasn't just a geological or architectural system. It was the central node of the Fame's entity within. The Benevolent Spire. It consumed free, while individual fate and the very randomness of existence, specifically targeting the essence of chance and potential. And in doing so, it grew stronger, perpetuating its own existence by subtly integrating the very spark of human choice into its boundless living consciousness. The whispers promised ultimate order, the perfect assimilation into fate's grand design, but the price was the very self. He had to fight it not with force, but with randomness. His own chaotic choices, his personal unpredictability. the specific unique quirks that made him Adrien Finch. He pulled himself back from the drone, controls his limbs heavy. He fumbled for his sealed emergency kit, pulling out a small, worn, well-loved set of dice, his personal good, luck charm from his early days of probability theory. It was a simple personal object, utterly devoid of academic pursuit or grand theories. It was just a moment of pure, unadulterated chance and human unpredictability. He focused on those dice, on their random tumble, on the mundane comfort of their weight in his hand. He concentrated on the feeling of chaos, the warmth of pure, unadulterated chance. These were small, seemingly insignificant details, utterly personal, utterly his. They were not universal knowledge. They were the anchors of his individual existence. The network pulsed violently. The whispers in his mind intensified, turning into a cacophony of distorted voices, all screaming order, conform, surrender. The probe shook its connection, flickering. He slammed the dice against the drone's control screen, pressing it directly against the point where his distorted reflection and the shadowy entity had appeared. A blinding flash of static erupted from the screen, followed by a deafening shriek that resonated through the tent. The underground network pulsed erratically, its internal glow flickering like a dying flame. The spectral figure of the Fames recoiled from the screen, dissolving into fragments of swirling energy and shimmering light. The overwhelming hum ceased. The pervasive cold dissipated, replaced by the normal chilling temperature of the night air. The drone's connection stabilized, the screen clearing. Adrien collapsed against the controls, gasping for breath, his entire body aching. He was alive. He was himself. But the Benevolent Spire had shown him a horrifying truth. This wasn't just a local legend. It was a fundamental force of erasure. It shifted. It adapted. It consumed. And it would keep consuming quietly, relentlessly. Well, he gasped, his voice hoarse, a sliver of his old humor returning through the shock. That was a rather aggressive attempt at a probability adjustment. Definitely going to need therapy after this, and maybe a very long, very strong coffee. Or perhaps just a quiet existential crisis in a very, very chaotic casino, far away from any perfectly orderly monuments. Definitely no symmetrical architecture. Sorry, Oracle, you're fired. He gathered his equipment, packed his car, and drove away from the Spire district. The journey out felt strangely muted. The city, once bustling with energetic chaos, now seemed unnaturally still. He saw no more visual echoes. The spectral figures were gone. The direct threat had receded. He reached the highway, then the open road, and finally returned to his quiet, unassuming apartment. He felt an urge to talk, to explain, to scream his horrifying story. But as he looked at the casual indifference of the world, the mundane rhythms of daily life, he knew he couldn't. How could he explain a place that consumed luck and probability, when his own sense of chance felt a little muted, his statistical intuition a little less sharp? He ordered pizza. When the delivery driver asked for his name, he hesitated for a long moment. He had to consciously search for it, pull it from a distant, almost forgotten corner of his mind. Adrien, he finally managed the name, feeling foreign. Adrien Finch. He knew it was his name. He knew who he was intellectually. But the feeling, the sense of being Adrien Finch, the passion, the quirks, the unique perspective, it was all muted. Like a complex algorithm that had been simplified, its intricate layers flattened, its unique outputs generalized. He returned to his modest home. His AI assistant Oracle rebooted itself, its synthetic voice chirping. Welcome back, Adrien. Probability of a successful evening, 78.3%. Probability of existential dread, 21.7%. Adrien just sighed. He turned off its vocalizer. He felt a quiet companionship, a theoretical understanding of its function. But the spontaneous frustration he usually felt at its sardonic observations was dampened. He was observing the emotion rather than fully experiencing it. He looked at his research, his meticulously organized datasets. He knew what they were. He knew their statistical significance. But the intense passion, the all-consuming obsession that had defined his life was gone. It had been part of the flavor he had deliberately shed. He was a blank slate. He was present. He was Adrien Finch, but he was a greatly reduced version. The entity hadn't fully consumed him, but it had taken a very large bite. He was a survivor, yes, but one who had paid a steep existential price. He tried to go back to his research, but the vastness of probability now felt less compelling. The thrill of finding order in chaos, once so potent, was now a mere intellectual exercise. He completed his report on the Benevolent Spire, a dry factual account of its historical anomalies and alleged luck redistribution, carefully omitting any mention of pulsing, underground mechanisms, hungry entities, or the deliberate unraveling of his own soul. He couldn't. The words for it felt too grand, too vibrant for the muted person he had become. He sent the report. It was well received, lauded for its meticulous research. He got an offer for a new prestigious research position. He accepted. He would continue his work. But it would be work performed by a ghost of his former self. He continued to live, to function. He ate. He slept. He paid his bills. He maintained. Oracle, though, he kept its vocalizer off. But the hunger remained a faint phantom ache in his gut, a subtle echo of the entity that had almost consumed him. It was a reminder that parts of him were still missing, parts that might never return. And sometimes late at night, when the world was silent and the memory of the humming spire returned, he would catch his reflection in a dark window. And for a fleeting second, he would see something else. A flicker of something utterly blank, a void, where his eyes should be a ghost of the fame's hunger looking out. It was quickly gone, replaced by his own muted reflection. But he knew it was there. A lingering echo. A silent testament to the price of survival in a truly cursed state. Adrien continued his work, traveling to other statistical anomaly sites, meticulously documenting peculiar patterns of fortune and misfortune. He avoided districts that felt too orderly, monuments that hummed with unnatural precision, and communities whose luck seemed eerily perfect. He became an expert in subtle imbalances in the quiet redistribution of fate, not because he sought them out, but because he sharpened senses, a grim gift from the Benevolent Spire now instinctively recognized, a scent of the truly cursed states. His colleagues noticed his changes. He was still brilliant, still precise, but a certain spark had dimmed. His enthusiasm was intellectual, never emotional. His laughter was rare and often seemed to echo with a strange hollowness. He was admired, respected, but kept a subtle, almost imperceptible distance from personal connections. He could no longer afford the vibrant randomness that made one truly vulnerable to the creeping hungers of the world. He sometimes wondered about the debtors beyond the walls, the forgotten souls whose misfortunes fueled the Spire's blessings. Were they consumed entirely, their bad luck absorbed into the vast dreaming consciousness of the subterranean entity? Did they become part of the fames, silently orchestrating the prosperity of the chosen few? The thought chilled him, a constant reminder of the fine line between being and being at beta point in a cosmic equation. Years turned into decades. Adrien grew older gracefully, but without the usual telltale signs of profound aging that etched lines of joy or sorrow onto others' faces. His face remained serene, his eyes clear, almost ageless, much like the eternally content residents of the Spire's district. The price he had paid for his escape wasn't just a muted personality. It was a subtle, prolonged absorption into the very phenomenon he had survived. He was not consumed, but he was recalibrated. He found himself almost instinctively leaving small, symbolic offerings of chaos near orderly structures, even in distant cities. Not to appease a god, but to acknowledge a truth he now carried within him, that the universe had its own hungers, and some of them were far older and more profound than human comprehension. A slightly crooked picture, a single misplaced book on a shelf, a random unexpected splash of paint, small gestures almost imperceptible, a quiet act of defiance against the lingering shadow of the fames. His final years were spent in a quiet apartment far from any grand monuments, with Oracle, whose vocalizer remained off, but whose internal calculations continued their silent, ceaseless hum. A small, comforting mystery. One quiet winter evening, as the first snow touched the cityscape outside his window, Adrien felt the familiar hum. Not in his bones, but deep within the earth, resonating across miles, across the very fabric of the world. It was fainter now, almost a memory of a sound. He looked at his reflection in the dark window pane. His face, serene and ageless, stared back. And for a fleeting moment, he saw it not a distortion, but a subtle deepening in his eyes, a shadow that hinted at a vast ancient hunger that looked out for just a flicker through his own pupils. It was quickly gone, replaced by his quiet reflection. But he knew the curse of the Benevolent Spire hadn't been defeated. It had simply shifted its focus, extended its reach. It was a perpetual echo resonating through the land, waiting for new sources of probability. And Adrien the survivor had become a subtle living conduit of its truth. Because some curses, dear listener, don't just happen to a place. They are the place. They absorb the very essence of what they touch, growing stronger, more cunning, more profoundly insidious. They become a constant, quiet hum beneath the surface of reality, demanding an unending, perpetual orchestration. And in a cursed state like the Benevolent Spire, where fortune is the bait and probability the ultimate trap, the greatest horror isn't being haunted. It's realizing that you've just become part of the very story you're trying to understand. And that the next season's do might be the silent, ageless echo of your own lost chance.